Do you do the switch in the back over to my slides? You do it? Okay. I wasn't sure just if I had to do something up here. We've got a few minutes here before we're supposed to get started. So you get some bonus content while we're here, right? You don't have to look at your phone for a little bit. My name is Jeff. I work on the .NET teams. I work with the folks who build Blazor, the folks who build Aspire, Visual Studio Code, all those things. And we're going to talk today about getting Blazor ready for the open internet. Has anybody been trying to do that? Put Blazor sites on the, just a few of you. Okay. I'm going to go through and some of the tips that I'm going to show you apply very well across to ASP.NET websites. There really isn't anything that's Blazor specific, but you're going to see a couple things along the way that are callouts that will apply, not even to ASP.NET, but to websites in general. So we should have a good time reviewing, taking a look at a couple of those things. And I've got two websites that I've built and maintain with Blazor that work out nicely as a simple demo to show for this talk. So 10 tips to get your Blazor application ready for the internet. Yes, my name is Jeff Fritz. You can find me on all the internet things. I am C# Fritz. That's on GitHub, Twitter. I can't call it X. On Twitter, Blue Sky, Mastodon, all the things. Twitch, YouTube. You can find me. I am C# Fritz. I'm a program manager at Microsoft. So I started going through and I started writing this talk after my experience tweaking and tuning and getting these two websites running. I wanted to build a little website that taught how to do C# development from the basics, from the beginning, for people who don't have any developer background. And I started this series that I called C# in the Cards. And I related everything about software development back to a deck of cards. And I built that little website, and I put together a bunch of episodes, and it was nice. It's a static website that has educational content on it. But the other one over here is Aspirify.net. And we had this idea when we launched .NET Aspire at .NET Conf 2023 that we needed a news website. And trying to tack on to Reddit or somewhere else is you're going to get lost in the sauce. So someplace that we could highlight and promote and show, here's all the Aspire things that are going on. So to build a news website, do you really want to take in content from the outside? Do you want to just crawl, find content, and shape it and place it on the site? Those were the decisions we went through, and it made sense to just crawl and put content up on an interactive website. But it wasn't going to be something that was going to see mountains of traffic, right? Aspire is still very niche, and folks will search and find content and inevitably get routed back to this website. But I built both of these websites with Blazor. You can find them at those addresses out on Azure. They're running. Anybody can connect in and start using them. And we know how to get started building those Blazor websites, right? .NET New Blazor. You're going to build components, pages. You're going to add your styles. You're going to litter your website with styles, with style blocks and here, there, and everywhere places. CSS files. You're going to integrate with JavaScript. Blazor gives us that ability to debug, run, hot reload. Then what? Right? This is kind of where ASP.NET and Blazor kind of leaves you at the cliff, and it's like, oh, what's next? Right? You're going to go and build all those things, and you now want to publish to the open web. So you start having questions like, what about page size? I used to not want to do ASP.NET web forms because this view state thing happened, right? And it made my pages really, really big to download. How does that work with Blazor and some of the options that are available? And what about latency, right? Does Blazor take a long time to render on the server and deliver? How do we handle that request latency and delivery of our content? And static file references, right? At ASP.NET, we're going to be pushing content around, images, CSS files, JavaScript. How do we do all of those things? There's different things that JavaScript and Node folks do to compact and merge together those files. Is there an easy way for us to do something like that with .NET? And I want to get listed on the search engines, darn it, right? That's the on-ramp. That's where folks are going to be able to search and find me, and I want to have a good listing out there, be reported well, and appear as a good citizen of the internet, right? So when people search for my content, they find me. And of course, the last one, I want to be able to handle a rush of visitors, right? Nobody wants to have that point where your site's about to go viral and it falls over because too many people are visiting your site. What do you do? How do we handle this? So the name of this talk is 10 Tips to Get You Ready for the Open Web. And I lied. There's 15 tips in this. Because I got through the first 10, I was like, you know what, I've got 5 more, and I put 5 more in the box for you. So there's 5 additional steps here that you can go through. The first thing that I tell everybody to do before you think of anything else, when you're building an ASP.NET application, you're building a Blazor application, you need to be able to handle multiple nodes. Most folks don't even think about this. If you're deploying to Azure App Service, you're probably not thinking about this because App Service puts this into the mix for you if you don't already have it configured, okay? If you're deploying to something like Azure Container Apps, you're deploying to somewhere else on-prem, someplace that the Microsoft.NET team isn't in there injecting and maintaining that platform, you're going to need to do this. So what you need to do is set up, first off, so that your forwarded headers are coming in and being delivered to the additional nodes in your collection of servers, right? Because there's going to be a proxy that's set up when there's multiple nodes that's going to hand off. It's going to do load balancing and hand off to all the web servers. You want to make sure that you receive those forwarded headers from that load balancer so that you can continue processing properly. This is important, especially if you have authentication in your application. If you're running inside of containers, you'll also want to have this configuration as well. So X-Forwarded4, X-Forwarded Proto are the 2 headers that you need to make sure you have dialed in for your application. You put this up in the top half of your program CS to get that configured. The second thing is data protection. So data protection takes that encryption key that every .NET website runs with, that does all the encryption for your cookies, for your headers, all of that stuff. It takes that encryption key and puts it in a shared location. On App Service, it mounts a drive behind the scenes and shares that to all the nodes that you have replicated on App Service. In ACA, it does something similar where it will share that data protection key. There's a bunch of different services that you can use to store that key. You can store it on disk. You can store it in Azure Blob Storage. You can store it in a database. And there's a overload for this that will get you connected to an entity framework database context so that you can specify there's where it is, and it will share and load that key into all of the nodes of your application that need it. That's the first thing that I tell everybody to do because 9 times out of 10, most folks haven't actually run their application on 2 machines, having 2 web servers running their application. The next thing that we've all got to do is we've got to diagnose performance issues. We've got to make sure that our application is performing well, that Google and Bing and DuckDuckGo and Ask Jeeves, is that still a thing? I don't remember if that still is. There's a tool out there called PageSpeed Insights. It's at pagespeed.web.dev. And this is actually a recent report that I got for the Aspirify.net website. This is kind of unheard of for a .NET website to have really, really fast performance and really, really good SEO. I can show you the current live version of that right here. I literally just ran this an hour ago, and you can see down here, this is for Aspirify.net. There it is. And it's coming in at 98% performance. I can do some work on accessibility. Best practices need a little bit of work, and 100% SEO. This is a really good website that you need to look at if you're publishing for the open web to go and start tuning these insights. And some of the things that it mentions here, you can tune and do directly in your code. There are ASP.NET libraries that I'm going to talk about through the rest of this session that will get you some of these things that it reports done for you. But like render blocking requests, you need to do stuff about how your elements are rendered in order to make that happen better. Efficient cache lifetimes. What kills me about this, look at this. It's saying that a week is not a long enough cache lifetime. And stuff coming off of Google fonts, Google's doing that. Like, come on, you're killing me here. So, and then YouTube, it's complaining that it's 2 hours. It's YouTube. I don't have control over that, but it's going to complain about that. So there's some really good tips that this will offer, and there's links that it provides that tell you how to fix some of these things that are in here. Like improve image delivery, like improve perceived load time, and there are images that are too big for the display dimensions. That's fine. I can reduce and fix some of those. And that's easy things for me to do to improve the perceived performance of the website. All right, let's jump back into this. We all kind of default to the non-www host now, right? I mentioned it's aspirify.net, c#inthecards.com, right? .net, Microsoft.com, visualstudio.com, right? We don't really do www anymore. There are rewrite options available in ASP.NET that allow you to tell it redirect to the non-www instance of this permanently, and don't forget to do this one, redirect to the HTTPS. HTTPS is a default thing now that everybody should be doing. If you're not doing it, get there. Everybody should be running with HTTPS, which is HTTP2 protocol, and you'll immediately see performance improvements because of that protocol you'll switch to. All right, that's an easy one. Just a couple lines to add into the bottom of your program CS. Another one that's going to take a little bit of work to set up, sitemap. The search engines want to know what the pages are on your site. We used to have a tool that would build this for us. It's not really a thing now. So we want to get this simple XML file with all of the URLs for the pages on our site listed along with expiration times so that the search engines know when to go and refresh your website to get new content to present. So make sure you list both your static content and your dynamic content. And for C# in the cards, I generate it with a minimal API. It looks silly, but here's a snippet of the source code for that page. And I'm literally using a string builder. Why? Because it's really fast. I don't need to think about it. I go through and list my static pages, including an about page. I do a for each through each one of the lessons, and I output a little block there, and I tell it, you know what, here's when it was published, and I wrap up the URL set at the end, and I return that string. And then I output cache this for like a week. And if there's a change and there's a new episode that's published, I flush the output cache. But then I'm not even retrieving it from, I'm not executing this code at all. All right? Now we can talk in Blazor about static server-side rendering, right? We've seen how to do Blazor server-side, Blazor WebAssembly. If you haven't tried Blazor server-side rendering, you gotta check this out because it is really fast. It will help you scale because it will render all the code on the server once, and then you can start to scale out, replicate that information, output cache it very nicely. It's great for presenting information. If you just have navigation, links going around to various parts of the site, it works great with that. Simple forms, folks are submitting information, it will handle that and do the enhanced navigation capabilities we've seen in Blazor so that content flows and appears very nicely and a rich experience, not that flash page reload interaction that we used to get with ASP.NET MVC and web forms. It does not provide that rich interactivity. All the event handlers, when you want to do an on change of a combo box, you want to do on page change of a grid, it doesn't handle those. You're going to need to wire up and set up that interactivity on your own. It also doesn't do real-time updates. So you're going to have to wire up SignalR yourself or WebSockets or some other technology if you want to get some real-time updates into your application. Or you can actually drop out in server-side rendering, and you can drop in interactive server components or interactive WebAssembly components. So I really like doing interactive WebAssembly with this. On the C# in the cards website, I'll drop over to that real quick. Folks don't know just how powerful WebAssembly is and what it can do. So here is C# in the cards. And right here, I have a little pager that has, here's some of the recent lessons. And this pager is running on a static server-side rendered page, but the pager, the data for this, is all sitting in memory. Is all sitting there loaded and put in memory of the browser, and WebAssembly is rendering this. And it's rendering it first pre-rendered on the server, and when the WebAssembly is ready for you, it actually activates it inside the browser. So if I go and force a new browser here, open that up, navigate down to it, and it's already downloaded and running in the browser for me. So folks that tell you WebAssembly is something that's big and heavy and it's hard to download, don't worry about that. That's not the case anymore. You can deliver WebAssembly and get fast, rich, interactive content out of it. I also look at it like this. Do you know how big the front page of YouTube is when you browse to it if you don't have any of their JavaScript libraries downloaded and cached on your machine? It's about 2 meg. A WebAssembly component that you add into your application is about 1.6 to 1.8 meg to start, right, with just basic functionality. You start adding a bunch of things in there, it's going to grow a bit, but you're going to be in at about 2 meg. You're about the same size as the YouTube front page, and the first time it's loaded, it's cached, and they don't load it again, just like the YouTube front page. So that's something that I want to make sure folks are aware of as we go through and talk about ways to optimize and grow your site. Of course, I have this diagram for what Blazor is. We know about interactive server, where we have WebSockets that connect out to the browser with the server. All of the code runs on the server, but it remembers how many users are out there. You can get hit with a lot of requests, and server won't be able to handle it, and it will need to scale quickly. WebAssembly runs with any type of web server running in the cloud, and all the code runs in the browser, like you saw with that little pager component that I had. The server-side rendering, that was introduced with Blazor in ASP.NET 8. That was 2 years ago now. Runs very, very fast, and the model, the transport model, is just like we had been doing with ASP.NET for years and years. So those are the 3 different models. Some folks aren't familiar with them, haven't really seen them or interacted with some of those. Okay. The next tip that I have for you is output cache. This is one of those things that is going to immediately speed up your websites. Output caching takes your HTTP response and puts it into memory or puts it into some other storage location. So what this lets you do then is, instead of having to render that HTML every time that there's a request, it gets it out of memory and emits that directly. The processor that your web server is running on doesn't get taxed with having to render that code. It just emits, here's what it was last time I rendered this. So there are attributes you can place on your Blazor pages, like this one, output cache duration, and it's a number of seconds. So this would cache for 5 minutes. Not bad. That'll get you somewhere. There's other options, though, that you probably want to consider. don't just cache for a duration, but predefine some policies for classes of pages and interactions that you have in your application that folks are going to be visiting and that may interact and have not just different behaviors, but different expiration times that you want to enforce. So here I set up a default expiration time span because it's easier to read time span and say time span from minutes, 30, and I set up a policy called lesson route because I've got different lessons and they all have the same URL route. So I set that up and I vary by route value on the episode number, and each one of those output cache that episode for 6 hours. I don't need to go and reload it. I don't need to have any interactions with it. It can sit out there, and every 6 hours it regenerates that page. And it doesn't take long to regenerate that page anyway. So if it takes a half a second to generate that page, the next person that comes through, they get the page in 5 milliseconds. Fantastic. I'm happy with that. Because it's one thing to put that cache into memory. The really cool place to put it is in Redis, right? Redis is that key value store that's available for you out there. Redis is a database that keeps all that in memory for you. All the data is effectively loaded up into memory. It takes one line of code, add Stack Exchange Redis output cache when you have this NuGet package. Microsoft ASP.NET Core output caching Stack Exchange Redis. So the folks that run the Stack Overflow website, they actually wrote this provider, and we sponsor and partner with them to make this really easy for other folks to use. So after you add the Stack Exchange Redis output cache, set up configuration and say, well, I need to go get that Redis connection string, specify the instance, write the database instance inside there that you want to connect to, and it does the rest for you. This is even easier to do with .NET Aspire now. .NET Aspire gives you the ability to get rid of these connection strings and just pass around a reference to that Redis resource, and it will automatically connect up and give you those connections to interact with. Runs very, very nicely out there. And you can even take a look inside the Redis cache and see the HTML being rendered. So now, after we've got all this stuff about output caching and speeding up, enhancing how quickly it renders and delivers that content, we want to make sure that folks on social media have a good experience, right? When you share that link to my website, I want it to appear really cool on Twitter or Facebook or LinkedIn, Mastodon, Blue Sky. So there's a bunch of header elements that you should put into the head of your HTML that will help to present the content for your website. So Twitter and Facebook both have test sites that you can go to validate your application and how it is presented on those sites. So cards-dev, twitter.com/validator. That site does still work, even though they push the X domains. Facebook has one at developersfacebook.com. The Facebook one will give you almost the exact same interactions that you would see on LinkedIn or links that are dropped onto Teams, because look at these tags are just ridiculous. These meta tags that you drop in here, some of these are picked up and remembered and used for multiple sites, and then Twitter does this thing where they've got their own series of them down here. So basic things like having a canonical link, specifying this is the page that I'm answering on. That's going to help you on the on the search engines so that they don't have duplicate copies of the same page. Title, description, keywords, robots, we know those from search engine things to make sure that the search engine gets those values appropriately. The next one's the OG tags, OG title, OG description, OG image, OG URL. These are the open graph tags. These are the ones that Facebook is going to use to generate this appearance with an image, and there's the URL, the title, and then a description that goes below it. All of these drive that information. And Facebook inspects and looks at what's on your public website, tries to render those things and paste them in. The content for the image and the URL, I've found that the open graph services, Facebook, LinkedIn, and so forth, not all of them handle relative URLs properly. Some of them come right out and say, we require you to have an absolute, fully qualified URL. It's best to just do it anyway, because you'll get that complete reference going through to exactly the page that you want folks to see. Twitter also, they have this option of a site here, and that's the username that's providing this information. Because we're in Blazor, you have to put 2 ats there. Twitter wants to see at something, right? At C#Fritz. Because we're in Blazor, we're in Razor pages, you need to put a second at sign there. So that's a typical gotcha that many folks need to take a look at. Now, the images, the content that we're presenting here, we want to make sure that they're as small and fast as possible, and that takes me into the next tip. Serving images as WebP format. Have you seen the WebP format? Has anybody not seen WebP? Okay, here's the deal. WebP is an image format that folks were iterating on, folks at Google were working on, and they got to a stable release of this image format in September 2023. And I was it was JPEG user before, then PNG in the early 2000s, mid 2000s, and now I'm seeing WebP, and we got to use this. It supports a lossy and lossless compression. It's a terrific replacement for all of our typical image formats. It also supports animation, alpha transparency. So I took this image of myself, right? I put it on the website. I had it at 600 by 600, and it was 450K. And I look kind of nice there. I went into paint.net, right? You know paint.net, right? Cool little application, open source, big fan of what they've accomplished. Opened that same image and just did a save as WebP, and it saved it at 30 kilobytes, right? That's real money that you're going to save in bandwidth costs, because instead of sending that really big, heavy image that you don't really need that level of depth on it, it's good enough. And honestly, I'm not sure you'd be able to tell the difference between the 2 images. It's going to give you just as good a quality image delivered at a massive savings. Start serving all your images with WebP. Yes, sir. It's hard to hear you. Do the browsers support this format? That's a fantastic question. Thank you for reminding me. I should put that in my notes here. Because all the browsers now are evergreen, right? Everybody installs their updates. All of the browsers support it now. But back in 2023, early 2024, Firefox and Safari were lagging behind, but everybody's got it now. So, which means, right, my biggest thing is my non-technical mother, I want to make sure that my site looks good in her browser, and since they all update automatically, I don't have to worry about it. Okay. So we've talked about making images smaller. We've talked about speeding up interactions. Let's start speeding up the way that we actually calculate things, the actual generation of our pages. There is a service called Memory Cache that's available to you in ASP.NET. This is a way for you to take the results of things that you compute, load them into memory, so that they're available to you later in your application. So think about things that you might query out of a database, or calculations that you might do based on some interaction that the user is doing. You can place them into memory cache, fetch them later. And there's also a distributed memory cache available under the interface iDistributed Cache with various providers available. Remember what I was telling you about make sure you can run on multiple nodes, multiple web servers? This will help you calculate once, and then that value is available across all of your servers. So once again, Redis is available. We really like Redis for this, but you can use SQL Server, Encache, Cosmos DB. There's a bunch of other providers. Real easy statement to set it up. Add Stack Exchange Redis cache, and you can see my editor didn't like the the code that I wrote there with the red underline. That's okay. Get connection string and the instance name. Real easy to set up. It saves that data so that you're not calculating it each time. The Redis fetch is so quick, single-digit milliseconds to return that data, and that's bound to be faster than it takes you to calculate those things. So if you do have to render pages, get the data more quickly that's already calculated, and then put the whole result of the thing in output cache and not have to worry about running this. So it's good to see those steps so that you progressively grow and enhance your application, right? Make it faster one step after the other. I mentioned about WebAssembly. If you need the interactive content, WebAssembly isn't slow or bad. So I recommend folks with Blazor don't use auto rendering. Auto rendering has some quirks to it. If you use WebAssembly, you can pre-render the content. I mentioned that earlier when we looked at the pager. You can pre-render the content. It is delivered very, very quickly, especially if you output cache. And then it starts downloading in the background, and then control handed over. So, and a link to C# in the cards. So pretty easy to pick up if you need the interactive components. Folks that are building schedules, folks that are building, a grid is kind of silly to do this with because you can really just do navigations with the grid and get the same thing happening. Doing interactive with WebAssembly should be something where you really want low latency interaction in the browser. So with WebAssembly, we talked about it could be large, as big as 2 meg. Make sure the rest of your content you're delivering, you minify it. So all the markup that you're delivering, the HTML, if you're delivering XML, minify that. Get rid of the spaces, the tabs, the extra lines, the comments. Real easy to do. There's a library out there called Web Markup Min, and you can find it on GitHub at this location. There's a NuGet package that you can find and download. And there's just, 5-6 lines of code, including the options here that I've set up and made a little bit easier to read. So I like to allow minification in the development environment so that when I'm working locally on my workstation, I know if it works. Allow compression. Once again, I want to make sure that I see that it's behaving the way that I expect it to in production. So I want the same behavior. The HTML minification will remove the HTML comments. There's a handful of other options in here as well. But remove HTML comments. Real easy for all of us to say, yes, get rid of those. That's going to save us space. And then the white space minification mode. I've found that the aggressive level of this will take out enough of the content for me. It doesn't take out too much of the white space. If you do the aggressive removal, if you have like pre-formatted code, right? Yeah, elements or code elements that you have on your page, sometimes it'll take out some of the extra white space in there. So there's other options underneath the white space minification mode that you can choose from. But I've found that the aggressive is good enough. XML minification, and the last one, HTTP compression. We want to make sure that our HTTP content is compressed. We'll see more about that in the next 2 slides. We want to do response compression. We want to compress the content. So adding response compression to Kestrel, the ASP.NET web server, initially activates what's called Brotli compression. That's a very aggressive compression algorithm. I grabbed a couple of these graphs down here. It's very hard to read, but the red is the Brotli compression. So you see that it has the smallest compression ratio. It compresses the most when compared to bzip to gzip or xz, which is another algorithm. In the compression time, it takes time to compress, no doubt. but the decompression time is the second fastest. If I can do more compression and take that load on my server, and it still decompresses and presents quickly in the browser, to me, that's a win, right? I want the appearance in the browser that the code was delivered and rendered quickly. So I want the decompression time that's the fastest, right? I don't want to sit here and wait on a deflate that's going to take some time to decompress and present all the content in the browser. So really good to turn on Brotli compression by default when you use add response compression. There's other options in there to set up gzip, deflate, other providers. All the browsers thank you, I'm going to come back to this. That is a fantastic callback for me that I'm going to remember now, sir. All the browsers support all of these compression algorithms. All of your web servers support them because Kestrel supports that. So when you do this in your application, activate the Brotli compression, and nobody will notice the difference except that it's faster to present your content. I could show that real quick on the website. Yeah, let's go over to the website and just take a quick peek. So in here, go into our developer tools, because we all use developer tools in our browsers, right? I'm assuming you do. So let me, disable cache. Right, give me, really? Really? Oh, I have a filter turned on. All right, so up here is the base HTML that was delivered, and it transferred 21.8, and when it opened that up, come on now, it was actually the same size. Show me some of these other ones. The JavaScript here was significantly compressed. That came from Google. My CSS bundles, there you go. That was 77K, and it expanded out to a 0.5 meg in size for CSS. And you can see here, there it is, accept encoding, gzip, deflate, Brotli, or Z-standard. So you're going to see a performance increase because you're pushing less content over the wire, and it expands quickly in the browser. All right, I've got just a few more slides that we'll go through, and we'll talk a little bit along the way. Optimizing JavaScript and CSS with Web Optimizer. So in Blazor, right, we have this option to do isolated JavaScript and isolated CSS, right, where it'll bring all of those CSS files together for our components and pages, merge them together, and deliver them as one CSS file. That's great, but I'd really like to optimize that, compress it, uglify it, maybe compress it in with some of the other things, like a Bootstrap library that I might have out there, or some other plugins that are included. So this group, Liger Shark, it's a couple of folks from the ASP.NET team, and they name themselves after the combination of a lion, a tiger, and a shark. I don't know why. It's a Liger Shark. And I just deal with it when I give this slide and have to explain that every time. But they created this library called Web Optimizer. They haven't updated it in a few years because it's still really good. We used to have bundling and minification as a separate library and tool set in the old ASP.NET framework with .NET 4.8, .NET 4.6.1, all of those ASP.NETs, right? Not the ASP.NET Core. This gives you that same type of functionality, and we can declare our CSS bundles and our JavaScript files that we want to minify. You can set up JavaScript bundles with commands here that make it very easy to say, remove all my comments. It's going to automatically get rid of all the spaces, all the tabs, the blank lines, and because I told it to build a bundle, it's going to merge all of those files together so that you deliver one file. Now, be aware, if you're delivering one file that is the Uber CSS file for your entire site, it might get kind of big, right? we saw I had a half a meg CSS file there, but Brotli saves the day and brought it down to, what was it, 50K, something like that? Like, this is good. But be aware, and you might want to build appropriate bundles for different areas of your website, so that when they're visiting the accounting area, there's an accounting CSS bundle. When they're visiting the order management, there's another separate bundle over there, and they're downloaded and managed separately. So, real easy library to use. I mentioned PageSpeed got upset at me about long cache control headers. So I put this in and actually told it, for static files, let's set long cache control headers. This is one of those features that isn't shown in the default templates, but it's really easy to configure. So all of us have a app.use static files in our startup for our application. So you pass in new static file options, and in this case I say on prepare response, and I pass in and set up this Lambda. So if the file requested ends with one of my image types or JavaScript or CSS, set the maximum age to 370 days. I didn't make it 365. I didn't make it 400. I chose 370. I don't know. It would have made more sense to round that off. And then just adding the cache header for cache control with max age. This gives you that header that you saw PageSpeed was complaining, this isn't fast, this isn't long enough for some of those values that were returned. So this is rolled out, and then actually, I think this is only on the one website, and I don't have it on the other. So another thing, talking about headers that we need to be aware of and we need to do that has become a thing over the last few years are security headers for your websites. These are things that are going to prevent browsers from doing malicious things, from man-in-the-middle attacks happening, right? Somebody hosting your website inside of a frame and injecting code that does things to capture interactions that folks do with your website and send them somewhere else. So some of these features are already in the template. HSTS, right? That's HTTP Strict Transport Security. That's going to make sure that we're strictly enforcing transport layer security. I always force a max age on that when I get into production area, 30 days, so that we're sure that we're enforcing on a good duration for these things. X content type options, that's a HTTP header. It's a marker used by the server to indicate that the MIME types advertised in the content type headers, they should be followed and not be changed. The browser won't come back and try to get things that you don't support. There's an attack out there called MIME type sniffing, where folks will go and try to inject and do different MIME types, submit requests for different MIME types in an effort to overload the server. So by doing this, it instructs the server not to allow those things to occur and to prevent the browser from allowing that interaction as well. Use XSS protection, right? And it's 2 X's there. But this sets up cross-site scripting filtering. So that's usually turned on by default in the browsers. So all of the browsers have some level of cross-site scripting filtering that, activated in the browser. You can actually force it to be turned on if it's available there. And the browser will sanitize the page. So enabled with block mode, I forget exactly what that configuration does, but that's the one you need to use for this. XFO is frame options. I mentioned about having your website hosted inside of a frame on somebody else's site. This declares and tells the browser, I can only have this page hosted in a frame if it comes from the same origin, the same host origin that is serving this frame, right? So I'm serving this frame from bing.com. It cannot be hosted by another website that isn't bing.com with that statement. So that creates a header that the browsers enforce. The use referrer policy, it controls how much referrer information, right? The HTTP referrer, How much of that should be included with the various requests that are sent out to the next page that you request? So in this case, we're going to send full referrer headers unless we're downgrading from HTTPS to HTTP. And you shouldn't really be doing that anyway in your sites, okay? So I've got those 15 tips for you. I've summarized them all here in this grid of 15 blocks. The big ones that always strike me that folks should be aware of and are a no-brainer to do, those couple items to configure for multiple nodes. Real easy to do. WebP images. You can set up a script that will go through and compress your images. There are .NET libraries out there that will automatically allow you to read an image, convert it to WebP, and save it out somewhere else. Use those WebP images. It's going to dramatically improve how much bandwidth you serve from your website. Memory cache, output cache are big wins. They take a little bit to set up, and if you use it with Redis, you're going to see dramatic improvements in your website. Redis is kind of that special sauce that you can add in and immediately see performance improvements. So we've got a few minutes left. Those are the 15 tips that I wanted to go over here. Any questions for me before I let you go? Yes?
You mentioned security headers.
Yes, security headers.
But you also have the CSV rules to ensure security.
Yes.
How do you handle this in Blazor? Because some of the scripts inject inline styles and inline scripts that are not possible in CSV.
So you're talking about the content security policies. If we have components, if we have pages that are injecting styles, injecting JavaScript, how do we handle those? The standard that we should be doing with Blazor is don't inject inline style, right, with our components. You can have those provided as those isolated CSS files, isolated JavaScript files, so that they get provided as a separate set of files, and then all of our headers and enforcement for that content can be injected and handled properly. So if you're managing and delivering those, you'll be able to, managing and delivering those pages and components, you'll have the ability to move that stuff around. And there are tools inside of Visual Studio and Visual Studio Code that will help you just go through and highlight a block of code and say, make this into isolated CSS, or make this into isolated JavaScript. And it will automatically create and move those files for you. So, good question. And that's something else I can add in for future on this. Yes? There's a lot of noise, so. Good question. So the question is, we used to host on IIS, we now have Kestrel. Is there any difference between them that we should be aware of, concerned about? When you're hosted on IIS, right, Internet Information Server, you're on the Windows machine, you're going to have Windows servers. That gives you then the ability to do that native Active Directory authentication. And that's great. You can set up IIS so that it reverse proxies into Kestrel. And Kestrel, our ASP.NET Core web server, can receive that authentication information, process, and behave appropriately. IIS is inherently a little bit slower than Kestrel. Kestrel was designed to be very, very quick, run on the metal, run in very small places, like inside of containers. So when you run with Kestrel inside of a container, you now will have the ability to raise the density of your application, be able to run multiple instances of your application on that same piece of hardware, and then have multiple nodes that you can test with, roll out with, and you'll end up being able to handle a larger load with less hardware. Versus IIS, when you try to get into the web gardening or web farm scenarios, can get a little dicey with managing machine keys and some of those things. So nothing wrong with IIS, but we've learned from how that web server was built and made advancements and improved on that in the Kestrel server. And we have certified Kestrel to run facing the open internet. We stand by that. We provide support for Kestrel to run on an internet-facing service. So, thanks for the question. Yeah, something else I'm going to dial into a future version of this. Anything else? Fantastic. Well, we've got 10 minutes left. I'll dismiss you and have a fantastic rest of your day. I'll be back later in the week talking about Aspire, and I even have a workshop on Thursday talking about Aspire. So thank you so much. Hope you enjoy the rest of Azure Dev Summit.